Hi everyone, this video is part of Macquarie University's coding tutorials, and today we'll be talking about array traversal. Specifically, we'll be looking at how to traverse an array of objects and what to do when some of the items in the array are null. We'll be using the latest version of our car class, last updated in our video on class constructors. We already know that an array is a data structure that stores a fixed number of elements of the same type. Arrays are objects themselves, but since they can store elements of any type, they can also store other objects. When we want to access or manipulate the elements of an array, we use a process called traversal. The way we do this is by using a loop to access the items at each index. Let's first create an array of cars. The way we do this is very similar to how we might create an int array, but we use the car type instead of int. Notice how we're not creating a car instance here, we're just creating an array that has 3 car references inside of it. Now, since all the elements in the array are currently null, let's make each index point to a new car instance. Let's select cars of 0 and make it a new car with Toyota as its make, Camry as its model, 2020 as its year, and 5 as its number of seats. Remember that we're adding the attributes in this order as it's what we specified in the car class. If we're ever unsure, we can just look back at the car class and see how the constructor works. As a reminder, with every array the first item exists at index 0 instead of 1, so in this case, cars of 0 is the first car reference in the array and we've initialized it using the car constructor. Let's now select the reference cars of 1, and to create an example of a null item, let's make this remain as null. Currently, it is null from when we created the array, but just to be specific, we will make it equal to null. Now, let's make cars of 2 be a new car. This time, let's use Tesla as its make, X as its model, 2022 as its year, and 7 as its number of seats. Now that the elements of the array are populated, let's traverse through the array and print out information about each car. Let's try this by printing out the car itself. Let's start with the loop for int I equals 0, I less than cars.length, I++, and then inside of the loop we'll print out cars of I. Let's run the code and we see that it's printing out something strange, then the word null, and then something else that's strange. These strange pieces of text are the memory address of the objects, that is, the hash code of where they are in memory. Usually, when we have printed, we've been printing integers, booleans, or other primitives, and we've gotten the actual values. This is because they're not objects, so we don't see any memory addresses. By default, if we use println on an object, its memory address gets printed. The word null is printed because the second item at index 1 is null, which does not have a memory address. We can actually override println from printing the object's memory address. We do this by creating a method called toString in the car class, which returns the string we want when a car object is printed. We'll cover that at the end of the video as a bonus, but for now we'll just use the displayInfo method we created before. Let's change the body of the loop to call displayInfo on cars of I. Notice how this is different to the print function, as this is a call on the car itself rather than passing the car as a parameter. If we run this now, however, we see we get a null pointer exception. These errors occur when we try to access an instance variable or call a method on an object that is null. In this case, it is happening because our second item is null. To get around this, we can use an if statement to first check if the car is null before displaying its information. Inside the for loop, let's only display the information if cars of I is not null. In code, we write this as if cars of I does not equal null and wrap this around the displayInfo call. We can also add an else after the if so that if the car is null, we print out a warning that the car is null, so we wouldn't print any information on it. For example, we can write this car is null and there is no information available. Now if we run the code, we can see the first car's information, then we get a warning about the second car, and then we see the third car's information. Now let's see how the toString method we mentioned earlier could be implemented. We want to get the same format that we get from displayInfo, but the method must be called toString and return a string. Let's start with the function signature, public string toString, and we don't need any parameters. Let's make a string variable called result, so we can easily concatenate each of the parts we need onto the string. Let's start with first making it be equal to the first line we're printing in displayInfo. We'll end this line with a new line character, meaning that when this gets printed, whatever follows this text will be put on a new line in the console. This new line character is written as a string and is a backslash followed by the letter n. Now let's add the second line to the result by going result plus equals and copy pasting what we had in the second print statement of displayInfo. Again, we'll add a new line character at the end. We'll then need to do this for the third, fourth, fifth, and last line. If you take a look, this is exactly what is being printed in the displayInfo method. One thing to note is that on the final line we do not need a new line character. This is because println automatically adds one at the very end for us. Finally, we can return the result. Now back in the client class, array traversal, we can replace the carsofI.displayInfo function call with a normal print statement passing in carsofI just as we did before. Now if we run the code, we get the same output we get when calling displayInfo. In Java, every class gets a toString method by default, as this is what gets called when we print an object. The default toString method returns the memory address of the object, which is what we saw earlier. We can then override it by defining it ourselves in our classes, much like constructors. It's definitely rare for an instance method to override like this, and if you wanted to, you could call the toString method on the car itself in the print statement. Have a go at trying to create other toString methods in other classes, like the rectangle class we made in previous videos. In this video, we've looked at how to traverse an array of objects and how to deal with null element in an array. Remember that when you're traversing an array, it's important to use a null check before trying to access or manipulate an array to avoid a null pointer exception. It's also important that if we have multi-dimensional arrays or objects with other objects as instance variables, that we check those inner items for null too. As a bonus, we also looked at how the toString instance method is a nice way to change the default way an object gets printed when we call the println function and pass the object as a parameter. In the next video, we'll look at how a class can also hold arrays as instance variables. See you there!